And
I'm in Cape Town.
how's the weather there?
A bit like London today, overcast.
Brilliant. Thanks.
Oh, it's not 7 degrees here.
Hello, Simon.
Alec, how are you?
Yeah, fine, man. Fun. Very, very well, thank you. So we're all looking good here. I've just got to get my all my computers in the right place and make sure we've got. I just want to check here on the settings. Last night we had
Problems.
We had problems from one little setting. You can't believe it. One tiny little setting caused unbelievable chaos for us. Sure. It was just crazy. But anyway, now it's all fixed. All good. I'll be 1 second here. Yeah, a nice busy day today. Okay, there we go. Live on the channel. I had my webinar today, Stephen. I do a
yes, your update on your portfolio.
Yeah, on the portfolio, and that was quite. We got 19 people on YouTube. Hello, 19 people on YouTube. Just remember that. Why would I be getting a call from the UK? Can I call you later? Thank you. The 19 people on YouTube. If you would like to ask any questions, just go on to the bottom there and type the questions in. It's quite easy. Type questions here. Okay, thank you. Right. Just double checking everything on our side here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, right. All good. Yes, Stephen, that's. I think those results from Coronation are well worth discussing, if you can. And then.
Yes.
This is Ash from Reuters. Ash from Reuters. I don't know why Ash from Reuters wants to talk to me now. I suppose Ash from Reuters thinks that this is a very, very quiet time here in South Africa. As I'm sure it is. Hey, and did you see all the stuff coming out, Simon, on McKinsey? They've just made another 870 million rand settlement.
With who? With Eskom again?
With Transnet. So they paid Eskom $1 billion. Yeah. Now they're paying another 870 to Transnet on the regiment stuff.
Yeah, but it's all forgiven, Alec, because they're flying the pride flag above their offices today. So all's well.
Man, this is Mr. Lincoln Reader doing your best to get me in trouble, but that's okay. Doesn't matter. All right, we ready to go? I just want to make sure. Piet Roux. Let me just double check with the guys here. Stu, Piet Roux hasn't emerged yet. Piet Roux hasn't emerged. Do you want to just see from Nadia if she can try and find him? Because he hasn't come through on that. Okay, so we'll start with Simon then. Okay. Stand by. I'm going to now. We're now going to connect.
Eskom, the belegging.
Stand by. Business Power Hour starts in 25 seconds. 15 seconds. 10 seconds.
The BizNews Power Hour.
Welcome to the BizNews Power Hour, where we give you the rational perspective on business news that matters. Indeed, we do. And we've got a cracking lineup for you this evening. There has been a constitutional court case going on at the moment. And Piet Roux, the chief executive of Sakeliga, who's the man behind the Court case, is going to be talking to us in just a couple of minutes. Piet, nice to have you on the program tonight. I see you nice and clear in our virtual studio. How did things go today? You've been gearing up for this 25th of May occasion.
Yes, Alec, it was a 4-year legal litigation process. It turned in the higher courts, then went to the Supreme Court of Appeal, where we were successful last year in setting aside those 2017 procurement regulations. I can tell you more about what that meant, but then today was the Constitutional Court case where we defended the Supreme Court of Appeal's ruling against the Minister of Finance, now, of course, Minister Tito Mboweni, but 4 years ago it was Minister Pravin Gordhan. And it was a day full of arguments. We had many amici and also other parties joining the proceedings. So today was a fully packed Constitutional Court case.
Yeah, we got lots to talk to you about that. I was surprised to see the EFF, the real EFF, were actually on your side.
Well, they joined as an amicus curiae. So supposedly they're there in the interest of justice as a friend of the court. And there was one other amicus curiae in the Rule of Law project of the Free Market Foundation. Now, I could say that the Rule of Law project made arguments that were supportive of the points we were to make, and they add very important additional points. The EFF, we opposed their admission as amicus curiae. They were actually only repeating some of the minister's arguments and politicizing the case. So they weren't very much of assistance.
Okay, so that kind of squares that one up. But we'll talk about this in just a moment. Simon Lincoln Reader joins us from London, our very popular columnist here on BizNews. And you're going to tell us about some of the conspiracy theories that are being projected by one Jacob Zuma.
Yeah, I think, Alec, we could go back a bit further than you could see that even before Zuma, conspiracies were in the ANC kind of even before Thabo Mbeki's time, and they followed Mbeki and they followed the exiles, and there's good reason for that. These guys were in Maputo and Lusaka and London, and being sent bombs, looking over their shoulders. And Mbeki was the continuation of that suspicion. And in 2000 he started talking about the CIA and AIDS. And then in 2001, Steve Twitter came up with this report that implicated Matthews Poza, Tokyo Sekwali, and Cyril Ramaphosa in a plot to dispose of Mbeki. And then the Browse-Mole report came out, which was a sort of mixture between fact and fiction. But then you can draw a line from Browse-Mole all the way to 2015, where Project Spiderweb came out. And that just indicated the depths which the ANC was prepared to entertain distraction on the part of emphasis on Zuma for what he was really up to, because it was complete crap. The whole thing, it implied that the Oppenheimers, the Rothschilds, and the Ruperts were in cahoots with Maria Ramos, and it was just, you could not believe it. But this was something that he used in his defense.
Well, we're going to be talking more about that complete crap. And Stephen Nathan is our guest co-host here on a Tuesday night. Stephen, as far as the markets are concerned, things going on, we see, before we go into that, we're also going to have Paul O'Sullivan later on the program tonight. He's been on EOH's case since 2017, and EOH is back in the Zondo Commission after, well, they want more answers to that story. Just from an investor's point of view, I've been looking at EOH, and it's 7 Rand a share for a company that was, 188 Rand at one point, and very recently was nearly 10 Rand a share. Is it even worth looking at it, Stephen, or are you trying to catch a falling knife there?
It's a difficult question to answer because, as you say, what are you buying? When you're buying an IT business, you're buying a reputation is really important. And what does this new business look like? I think that's what everyone is trying to understand. And can it get on with business, or how much does it have left over in terms of its capacity to keep on fighting all of these commission of inquiries? Because, you know, if you're a client of EOHs, you don't want to be associated with that. And if you're a staff member, you also don't want to be associated with that. So it's a very difficult situation. And it's a business that has bought so many businesses, and clearly they haven't got their hands around it. So it's definitely a high risk investment still at this stage.
Well, we're going to be talking more about markets getting closer to the top of the hour, but just to remind you that you're with BizNews Power Hour. You're listening to the BizNews Power Hour, brought to you by the team at biznews.com. Well, I hope that's been a nice little appetizer for you for what's coming up tonight. But let's kick off with Piet Roux, the Chief Executive of Sakeliga. Piet, it's all to do with BEE procurement. And if you go back a little bit at what's been going on at South African Airways, it's almost a headline-grabbing implementation there. And we've seen it in many, many court papers, that what occurred at South African Airways, because it was a state-owned enterprise, was that they insisted that even though Shell, BP, and other suppliers were multinationals, that they had to put a BEE company in between. In other words, there were rent seekers in SAA. It got ridiculous to the extent that Dudu Myeni tried to bring in a non-existent financial services company to remake a deal with Airbus so that they could rake off hundreds of millions of rands. That was blocked at the last minute. But what you're up against is to try and get this out of the system. Explain where the intention comes from and the progress you've made.
Yes, Alec, look, BEE adds layer upon layer upon layer of structural cost to doing business in South Africa. Largely in the private sector, people, profit-minded people, value-adding-minded people try to minimize that. But in the state sector, in the procurement sector, the discipline of the market isn't there. And we see the great excesses of BEE right there in procurement in the public sector. Now, BEE is a phenomenon we're familiar with in its legislative phase. We've known it for about 20 years now, since it was promulgated in 2004. But it hasn't always been the same BEE. I mean, even the BEE we had in the 90s, a sort of voluntary phase, then you had the early legislative phase, and then you saw things being ramped up. And one of the significant step changes was in 2017, when then Minister of Finance Pravin Gordhan promulgated new regulations. And those regulations changed a very fundamental thing. Before those regulations, you could lose up to 10 to 20% of your tender points if you're not, if you didn't score well on Black economic empowerment. But after the 2017 regulations, you could be shown the door if you were not 100% Black owned. And the regulations made that possible. The 2017 regulations under Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan caused this thing to spiral out of control. And that's what we then took to court. And this is where we are today. It's basically that fundamental question. Okay, there's a phase in BEE where you can lose points. And then you can still consider competition and effectiveness and reliability. You can still trade things off. But then after 2017, there was this absolute exclusion of companies if they didn't satisfy some race criteria.
It's so interesting that it is completely race-based and completely focused towards state procurement being allocated to one sector of the population. It is justified on historical grounds. Are you taking that into account at all when launching the series of court cases, which you've won every one so far?
Yeah, if we take into account, and we do, and if we take into account, as one should, what you could call the initial aims of BEE, some of the aims, which was the very aims why many people, business people today are very critical of BEE, supported BEE, or try to implement some form of it. It is the idea that there should be a normal society, a society that does not allocate tenders and business and government privileges according to race, but normalizes things. And the ultimate beneficiary we should always keep in mind is the general population. And especially if we consider it in race terms, given the country and the community we are in, then we must also say the ultimate aim of a tender, of any business, is to serve the end user. That's the ultimate measure by which we should judge a tender. Does it serve the end user? But what a BE has become is judging the person who's going to profit from the business. And that's going to lead to higher cost and lower value. It's basically a privatization of taxes in a sense. You funnel taxes that could have been used to lower costs and services to the end user, which is what progress and empowerment is all about, to a few people and make them rich. So we do take it into account, and precisely because we do, amongst other things, that forms part of our conviction for why we're going to scale up our BE litigation efforts and our strategy to turn this around. The country must turn BE around.
We've done quite a lot of coverage recently on the whole CADA deployment issue, because I guess the one hand, it fits very comfortably with BEE. You deploy a CADA into the business community because you need to have BEE points. And David Shapiro made this point on the program last night when he said that what appears to have happened is not only are the CADAs deployed into the public sector, but even in the private sector as well. Is this something that becomes part of your whole legal suit, or are your members not really that interested about that side of it yet? They just want to get the BEE sorted.
Look, BEE, if we take Minister Rob Davies, a few years ago, he defined BEE as the policy to change the ownership and management of the economy according to demographic proportions, on race-based proportions. That's his definition, and I think that's a very accurate definition in terms of how BE rolls out in practice. That's the ultimate yardstick by which people who say there isn't enough BE, they look at the ownership and management patterns, and then they say that doesn't reflect demographics, therefore we need BE. I say no, what you should look at is the outcomes. But regardless of that, I mean, what we've seen with BE is that the first you had this deployment of CADAs into the state-owned enterprises, but BE also sort of puts onto many private companies' boards our man from Pretoria. And that man from Pretoria, I think, inhibits proper business decisions and proper discussions in an open and frank way. Now, I must be clear, Alec, and I know this might be taken for granted, but let me state this openly. Naturally, there are in every company very profitable and valuable business propositions and cooperation between black and white and any race group. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about the artificial situation by which political allocation of capital is being sought instead of entrepreneurial allocation. There's only one outcome.
Just to close off on this side, with your court cases, what are you actually hoping to achieve? And then the second point is just explain again to us why the EFF are a friend of the court on your side in this action.
All right. So let me take the first thing. BE is part of the public mindset in South Africa. Generally and increasingly critically so, that's very good, but still BE is now part of the legislative quagmire we find ourselves in. So it's not so easy to go for the heart of BE, just get it cancelled and do something else. Unfortunately, we'll have to do this layer by layer. And so that's our litigation strategy, is to find the sharp edges of BE where it is most harmful and attack those in the public interest. The most recent developments in the last 3 or 4 years is where we see a shift from the BE used to be about the involvement or the relationship between the state and private entities. But BE is now, and that was a vertical relationship, but BE is now morphing into a horizontal relationship. It's infringing and setting requirements for professional conduct, for company-to-company transactions. And so it's more and more moving away from your relationship with the state and moving right into private, commercial, and professional transactions. So we'll, of course, I think we have to litigate from the outside in. And so we'll start with these latest, most harmful iterations.
So it's like a layer of an onion. You're going to be peeling it off, and you're not going to stop. And your members are happy to fund this?
Our members are funding us. We're very happy. We have about 12,000 members across the country in different sectors, and they fund everything we do. We're a public interest non-profit organization, and our purpose is to create a sense environment conducive to business in the public interest. Everything we do, we measure by that standard, and we're very grateful for people who support that. Now, the litigation we do, I mean, this will cost us in excess of, it's going to cost us $1 million or $2 million, just this case. So the other 5 cases we're currently considering, multiply that by another $1 million or $2 million. So we can always do with more support, but it has to be done. Like, we have to turn the tide on BEE. If we don't, I don't see, there's just so much this country can be, so much that can be done, but it's not being done, and we're going right on the wrong way with BEE. And with the public sentiment turning, I think it's time to step on it now.
Let's just leave the EFF out of it. You have explained that they came in for political reasons. Stephen, as our guest co-host tonight, you got any thoughts on this whole subject while Piet's with us?
Yes, lots of thoughts. I mean, I think that, you know, the bottom line, and Piet touched on this, is for the government to define the outcome. So clearly we know that the outcome in broad terms is a much more inclusive economy, and I think the vast majority of people would support that wholeheartedly. But in order to have an outcome, you can't have a vague and a general outcome. You need to be much more specific, and the government needs to quantify exactly, you know, what are the outcomes they are trying to achieve, and also by when. Or is this just an open-ended, ever, you know, that it continues for 1 year or for 100 years? And without doing that, and without measuring the results, so what are the results of government tenders in this area? You know, so we have no data to work with, and I think there's just a lot of frustration, and there's the perception that you know, the benefit or the cost far outweighs the benefit, and not only to business in general, but also we're not creating enough black entrepreneurs, because it seems to be tenderpreneurs and, you know, fronting in this way. And just, you know, one thing, Alec, it reminds me of listening to this is back in 2005, when I was in my investment banking days, we had a mandate to help one of the state-owned enterprises to articulate their financial strategy because of the concerns that they weren't commercial enough. And I was actually leading that project, and I asked the CEO one question, and I said, what is your target return on equity or return on invested capital? And this is one of the biggest state-owned entities in South Africa. And they couldn't answer that. They couldn't say it's X percentage. You know, normally you'd say, you know, we look for a return of 1 or 2% above the risk-free rate. And, you know, if the risk-free government bonds are 8%, we look for a 10% return. And they couldn't answer that simple question. And they went on to say, well, you know, the shareholder being the state gives us many targets. We've got to have, you know, employment, and we've got to get affirmative action and employment equity, et cetera, et cetera. And the problem being is, unless you define these things properly, you know, we're going to be chasing our tails for many years to come, and it's going to cause a lot of frustration, and we are going to underachieve our long-term growth rate.
Something that you mentioned a moment ago, Piet, and just kind of as a parting shot, that this is a good time. The timing is right now to address this issue. Malaysia had their Bumiputera, which is their BEE, which they have unwound because it was a failure. You would have thought South Africa followed a lot of what Malaysia did, particularly in the early days of democracy. Maybe that's something that we might learn from.
Yeah, I'm afraid South Africa seems to stick to things that have proven failures. BEE is one of them. But why I say the tide is turning is, I mean, just a week or two ago, you had Thuli Madonsela at the Dadine Gordimer reading saying BEE was a failure. You even have people like Sandile Zungu, who's the president of the Black Business Council, writing, I mean, of course, in defense of BEE, but still admitting that it's a failure. So even the proponents of BEE today admit that it's a failure. And I think it's in this episode, of course, that not everybody agrees on why it's a failure. Fundamentally, it's a failure because it's the political allocation of capital instead of entrepreneurial allocation. That's why it's failing, and why it will continue to fail. But during this time of huge skepticism of BEE, of state capture, it's the time to step on the gas and show why it isn't working. And just to refer to what Stephen said, I mean, sunset clauses, this has to come to an end. Even if it was a success, we know it's a failure, but even there has to be a conception of when is the success and end. And in the Mbeki era, you had the panel on growth that he appointed under the Asgisa framework. That was led by Ricardo Hausman, Darren Asimoglu, and others. And there are papers available on Treasury's website today where these notable economists of Nobel Prize caliber are saying that there should be a sunset clause to BEE, where they're calling it at risk of becoming an open-ended tax on capital. That's where we are. We have to step on the gas.
Piet Roux from Sakeliga, and he was telling us about a continuous court case. They were in the Constitutional Court today. Simon Lincoln Reader joins us now from London, our popular columnist here at BizNews. And, well, I suppose you've got very strong views as well on BEE, but we won't be talking about that today. Of much more interest is your latest column, which is just going up onto BizNews in the next, probably in the next hour, Simon, where you unpack conspiracy theories. And one of the greatest protagonists of it being Jacob Zuma. But I guess you have to excuse him, because he's the man who says that Africa doesn't have a very large river. And also all the other continents in the world would fit into Africa. So he's not the best read person and the best example. But what are, maybe if you can pick up from your column, what are the conspiracy theories that are the most outrageous that you've seen from Mr. J.G. Zuma?
You know, Alec, you're quoting from the November 2015 speech. The night that he sacked Nhlanhla Nene, he went to the Sandton Convention Center where he kept guests waiting up to 2 hours. Patrice Motsepe was there. And apparently, from what I hear, Patrice Motsepe had his head in his hands as Jacob Zuma was talking. He also said something about Paul being African from Sudan. You remember? Saul.
Well, it was a beaut, Simon, because the SABC was summoned by the presidency at that stage to record this. So we were able to get hold of a recording. No one had really seen it until a couple of days later. We were tipped off on this and then ran the transcript, which is still on BizNews. It is horrific. But anyway, that was the guy who used to lead the country, fortunately not there anymore.
Yeah, I think, look, when certainly when people started noticing, and you know, he was an extraordinary man, and I don't mean that in any complimentary sense, but you know, you had these love affairs, you had Nkandla, you had this chaos surrounding a man, and conspiracy theories were never a great feature of his until he went to Russia in 2014 to be treated for poisoning allegedly at the hands of one of his wives. And you know, it's funny to look at that moment now, because he'd gone to America because he said that the Americans would poison him or they'd knock him off. But who are the people that do all the poisoning in the world? You know, who are the guys that are launching chemical attacks on other people, like what happened in Britain 2 years ago? But yeah, I think it was then. And then it was, as I spoke earlier about the Spiderweb, Project Spiderweb, which was obviously just designed to try and amplify the white monopoly capital narrative. And then, you know, now last gasp is the idea that Leonard McCarthy was a CIA agent who had an Afrikaans handler, which I think would be the first time in the history that a CIA agent had a local handler.
You lived next door to the Guptas, another one of your columns going back a few years. What do you make of the story that's now emerged that the Guptas are responsible for 49 billion rands worth of contracts that were issued by the state? Were they that powerful?
Yeah, I think they were, but I think also that we've always seen the Guptas exclusively through the lens of South Africa. And one of the mistakes that we've made is that we've never incorporated their role in the wider world. These guys are working with some of the biggest crooks in India, some of the biggest crooks in Malaysia, and we didn't consider that. We thought that here was a group of guys that had come and opened a shoe shop in Killarney and had worked up to computers, and they're selling grey merchandise on the Joburg market. But, you know, they have been seen in the company of some of India's biggest money launderers, people who have actually been prosecuted and jailed for this. So I can absolutely understand, and nothing could surprise me about these guys. As soon as, they fled, and they had obviously this network of contacts in the Middle East. You don't do that with a little shoe shop in Killarney, Alec.
But what about the role of Dubai? We now know they're sitting in Dubai. We even know what their house looks like. We know that Zuma's son, Duduzani, who's also wanted for some, the Zondo Commission would love to have an engagement with him. He's sitting with them in Dubai. Where's the role of Dubai in all of this? Surely at some point in time, if they want to be part of the global community, they're going to have to allow the extradition of these criminals.
Yeah, I think for a few years now, and even supposedly clean organizations, if you recall, the International Cricket Council had an office there and completely perverted the game from those premises with the cooperation of the English, which should never be forgotten. But Dubai has, overtaken, without question, the sleaze capital. You get your crypto shysters are there, your foreign exchange shysters are there, and nothing seems to be done about it. I mean, I think that there obviously is some sort of arrangement with the Emirati that allows this or casts a blind eye.
They used to call Monaco a sunny place for shady people. Perhaps the Monaco's moved over a little bit south.
Yeah, quite possibly. In fact, yeah, sure.
Just to close off with, I know you've written a lot about woke. There was a fabulous editorial in the Wall Street Journal today by the editor-at-large highlighting what's happening to Jews in America being attacked in the street on the basis of what he says, the spread of wokeism, i.e. seeing the world through the prism of oppressors and oppressed. So now anybody who's Jewish, given what was happening in the Middle East, has suddenly become one of the oppressors. This is a very dangerous situation, he says, Gerard Baker, because it gives anti-Semitism gives a very good temperature gauge on the health or otherwise of society.
Yes, Alec, I could completely agree, and I commend the Wall Street Journal for being one of the only media firms in the world to address this. Everyone else, including the BBC. I mean, I don't know if you've heard about this, but the BBC has as its Palestine expert a woman who has previously declared on Twitter that Hitler was right. Okay, and
seriously, the BBC?
Investigation that's been launched and so on, but this is the pervasive culture within woke ideology, and I also blame to an extent corporates that have adopted the same ideology because they're essentially allowing it to flourish, and this notion of exclusive injustice, and there are only a few people in the world that are allowed to behave licensed to destroy. It's very worrying what's happening in London. Someone sent me a message earlier, and there's a community centre in Leicester which has been overtaken by school children, none over the age of 16. They're screaming and shouting, "Kill Zionism" and "Allahu Akbar." And this is, very, very worrying. And to the Jewish community who really endured the turmoil of the Corbyn experiment, the Jewish community are quite understandably worried.
Simon Lincoln Reader, you can pick up his latest column on BizNews. It's, as good as always. Simon is a satirist, so don't get a little bit too hot under the collar, but he certainly hits some very raw nerves from time to time. You're listening to the BizNews Power Hour, brought to you by the team at biznews.com. Well, it's the top of the hour now, and that means it's time for our news headlines and our market report, kicking off with our editor-at-large, Jackie Cameron. Here's our flash briefing.
Eskom, the beleaguered South African state power utility, has reduced its debt by almost a fifth. This is after repaying maturing loans and benefiting from a more favorable exchange rate. Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan says the debt was slashed by about 83 billion rand at the end of March. Professional services firm McKinsey, which played a central role in state capture and corruption in the Jacob Zuma era, has repaid 870 million rand to parastatal Transnet. The figure includes fees paid to McKinsey in respect of the projects undertaken with Regiment's capital and includes interest. The South African Reserve Bank is studying the benefits of issuing a digital currency for general retail purposes. It says a central bank digital currency, or CBDC, is a form of electronic cash linked to the sovereign currency on a one-to-one basis, with its value protected by the central bank's monetary policy and inflation targeting regime. The opposition Democratic Alliance has launched a petition against the Firearms Control Amendment Bill, which proposes a ban on firearm ownership for self-defense. It says we must protect gun ownership for self-defense as it is the last line of defense for millions of South Africans. The DA notes that just by walking in the streets, South Africans are exposed to dangers similar to those faced by people in some war-torn countries. ABSA, Investec, and the Development Bank of Southern Africa have indicated that they could support a bid by a Turkish company to supply emergency power to South Africa. The inclusion of Car Powership, a unit of the Caradenas Energy Group, on the list of preferred suppliers has attracted criticism because it would lock the country into the use of a fossil fuel for 2 decades. Car Powership's contract has been further imperiled by a legal challenge from DNG Energy that may be heard in mid-July at the earliest. And that was your BizNews Flash Briefing. I'm Jackie Cameron for BizNews. For more on those and the other big stories of the day, visit biznewsradio.com.
And time now for our market update, which is with Nadia Swart. But before we bring Nadia in, let's hear from our sponsor.
Bradrock believes that with every change in life comes opportunity, and the markets aren't any different. The daily movements in the markets mean change for us all, sometimes small, sometimes big. This daily market report is made just for you by Bradrock, the first ever needs-matched life insurance that changes as your life changes.
Well, Brightrock is very well known down your part of the world, Nadia, or your new part of the world, which is Cape Town. But what have the markets been doing today? Sorry, Nadia, my mistake. A little finger trouble here in Sandton. Let's try that one again. Okay.
All right. Okay. The JSE All Share Index was flat today at 66,077 points. Karoo was up by 5.8% to 513 Rand per share. Old Mutual was up by 5.7% to 13 Rand 65%. Cents per share. Montauk Renewables was down by 3.5% to 135 Rand per share, and Sibanye Stillwater was down by 2.5% to 61 Rand per share. In the currency markets, the Rand was stronger against all the major currencies to 13 Rand 86 to the dollar, 19 Rand 59 to the pound, and 16 Rand 97 to the euro. Gold is higher at $1,893 an ounce. Brent crude is steady at $68.64 a barrel. And the premier cryptocurrency will put you back 529,000 Rand a Bitcoin.
529,000 Rand. Now, Stephen Nathan, let's talk a little bit about these cryptocurrencies, because we have China who's saying, we're not interested. We're not interested in the private cryptos. We're going to be bringing our own cryptocurrency with the RMB. We have the Jay Powell in the United States saying that the Fed will have its own cryptocurrency in 2023. And now, as we heard from Jackie, the South African Reserve Bank is also working on having its own cryptocurrency. If that happens, why, if you can use cryptocurrencies that are issued by the Reserve or the central banks of these countries, why would you need Bitcoin and others?
Yes, I guess, Alec, the question is why do you need cryptocurrency in the first place? What exactly is it? Is it a method of payment? Is it an alternative to a currency? Because one of the views why crypto was started was because you can't trust governments. They print money. It's politically motivated. We want to have more control over our money and have the government less interfere less. So is it a method of exchange? And the answer to that is probably not, because it's too volatile. So you have to have a stable currency, because, as I think it was written, I'm not sure if I picked it up on BizNews, a Tesla costing you, if you're going to exchange it for a Tesla and you've only got a third of a Tesla in 3 days' time, it can't be a method of exchange. Is it used for speculative purposes? Then clearly, or investment stroke speculative purposes, what is the core function? And I think, what is incredibly impressive about crypto is the underlying blockchain technology. The technology is immensely valuable and really clever, and has a long way to go. And I think I've mentioned it before, and it has the potential to really disrupt financial services and disrupt a lot of the way that we transact and we store data and we have verifications and passports and all these sort of things. So the technology has got a long way to go, but the actual use of crypto as a currency, I think, is really in debate. And certainly what governments won't allow is governments won't allow themselves to lose control over the currency. Once you lose control over the currency, you lose control over your tax base, you lose control over your ability to influence monetary policy, and they're never going to allow that. So one of the concerns with crypto is that when it ever gets big enough and mainstream enough, governments are going to take it over because it can't fall out of the tax net or out of their fiscal and monetary control. And that's, I think, why you're seeing these governments react to say, well, actually, if you want this cryptocurrency, we can do as good a job ourselves, and we will retain it. And we make the rules and the law, so we can take it over at any time. So it's very concerning if you are an investor stroke speculator in crypto. I would be very concerned about the long-term viability. That's not to say you can make a lot of money or lose a lot of money in the intervening period, but governments aren't going to lose control over the currency, crypto or otherwise.
And it is rational if you unpack it, that the current structure of cryptocurrencies, they're untraceable, they have no boundaries. You can buy a Bitcoin in South Africa at 520 odd thousand rand, as Nadia said, not 900,000, which you would have paid a month ago. And you can go to the UK and translate that into British pounds at the ruling rate on that side of the ocean. Nobody knows, none of the authorities know what's happening. And of course, if you are using it for illicit proceeds or proceeds of crime, nobody knows that either. And that's what certainly the authorities in the United States and the UK have gone very strongly on record as saying. But I guess the big story here is that at last, the central banks are saying, we haven't been sitting on our hands as far as this move towards crypto is concerned. We too are going to be bringing something. But exactly as you've said now, we've got the law book on our side. So to buy a cryptocurrency in this kind of environment, man, you've got to be looking somewhere where maybe the benefit doesn't exist.
Yes, I think ultimately, the question with crypto is, what is it used for? What is the purpose of crypto? And as I say, it can't be too many things. It's either going to be as a method, as an alternative to currency. Why do we use currency? We use currency as a store of value, so we can measure our currency and measure our financial wealth, bank deposits, etc., or as a mechanism to transact, or thirdly, as some kind of investment type thing. It can't be much more than that. And the government can do that as well as anyone else. And even, I'm not even sure what, the fact that the government is going to launch a currency, what's it going to be used for? So, I think it's a bit like the government saying, well, we can also play this game. It's not that hard a game for us to play, so we can also play the game. And as I say, we control the final outcome anyway. So I would certainly be cautious as an investor stroke speculator in crypto.
Having a look at the markets today, something else Nadia mentioned was that Old Mutual picked up 5.5%. Now, I have no idea what the news flow was, or would this perhaps have been an uptick based on the very strong results that we saw coming out of Coronation Fund managers today?
Hard to tell, because Old Mutual did give an update recently, and there was nothing particularly exciting in the update. But you're right to say that Coronation, very strong results, following 91's very strong results, which is really, as an asset manager, when the market is incredibly strong, you effectively a leverage play on that, because your revenues grow at this really fast rate, and your revenues grow much faster than your costs. And Old Mutual, being a life insurance company, their biggest single driver is the underlying investment markets. So when investment markets are strong, you should be a leveraged, a geared play. So if the markets go up by 10%, your revenue should go up by at least 10%, and your cost should go up by a smaller amount. So you are a leverage play on financial markets. Also, as we've spoken about previously, Old Mutual has been a big laggard, and it is trading at quite a large discount to its embedded value, which is its own estimate of its net worth. So, it is a value play, and it has lagged the markets. So I don't think it's that surprising that it could have, a large jump, given that the markets have run and it's been one of the laggards. But I'm not aware of any company-specific news there.
And what you saw coming out of Coronation today, did that surprise you?
No, it didn't surprise, because, as I said, we've seen, we know what the markets have done, and if you look at Coronation, their assets over I think it's over the 6 months were up 11%. So their assets are now 629 billion rand. That's an enormous amount. Their revenues have gone up by more. Their revenues have gone up by 23%. As I say, it's a leverage play on the financial market, so you tend to do a little bit better. So their revenues are up by 23%. Their costs are up by 15%, which is a big number for costs to be up, I think, in this kind of environment, but it's still quite a bit less than 23%. So what that means is that their profits have actually grown by 44%. Because of the operational gearing. So, really strong set of results from Coronation. It's not unexpected. I guess what is the concerning issue for Coronation, and we also saw this with 91, is that while their assets are up quite strongly, up 11%, that's because of market movements. They actually had what's called net cash outflows. So they actually had more clients redeem assets than actually brought new assets in. So the actual organic or underlying growth in the business was negative 4%. So negative 4%, just to put that in numbers, is 24 billion was the net cash outflows. There are a lot of asset managers that actually wish they had 24 billion of assets under management. So, it's not an insignificant number. And I think that's a little bit of an worrying trend for these asset managers. As I said, we saw that with 91 across all of 91's businesses in South Africa and also internationally. There were net cash outflows. So, that money probably going into index funds. But there is a little bit of a concern that if there aren't strong markets, then the underlying organic growth of someone like Coronation is not looking great at the moment.
Stephen Nathan, the founder of 10X, and before that, top-rated analyst on the JSE.
This daily market report is made just for you by Bradrock, the first ever needs-matched life insurance that changes as your life changes.
Well, I had a very interesting conversation earlier this week with Hilton Kellner, the chief executive of Discovery South Africa, and also the CEO of Discovery Bank. At the end of it, I decided that I wanted to open an account at Discovery Bank. Let's just listen in on a little part of the clip. The idea is, once you've heard this, go on to biznewsradio.com on Spotify or on Apple iTunes, and you can hear the whole interview, which, by the way, has caused quite a lot of interest amongst the business community. It's our top read story today. Hilton Kellner is the chief executive of Discovery in South Africa. Clearly, a group like Discovery wouldn't go into banking without checking the I's and dotting the T's long beforehand. But what I'm really keen to talk about with you today is the whole word of mouth policy or strategy that you are adopting. Where does this come from, this idea of allowing friends, or when you refer friends, to get a reward for it?
It actually comes from our clients, as do so many of our sort of innovations and ideas that we have within the group. And it emanates from the fact that we just received a lot of feedback from our clients that they are promoting the bank actively to their sort of networks and their friends and their family. And they should be rewarded for it, in a sense. And a lot of it was tongue-in-cheek, but it got us thinking. And, if you think about globally today, digital businesses, organizations that have really powerful technology platforms are being grown by their own sort of networks. And we've always seen our clients as our greatest ambassadors, really the advocates that we want for our products. And so bringing it all together, we realized that we really had a phenomenal opportunity to do something different.
I've noticed that in South Africa, the other company that's had success in this regard is Easy Equities, where they say 60% of their new clients come from referrals. what kind of numbers are you seeing at the moment? Because you don't really associate love of a company with a bank.
The sort of the initial response has been quite remarkable. In the first 7 days, we've seen our clients send out over 100,000 referrals to their contacts, their networks, and so
Right,
you know, the
good.
traction has far exceeded any expectations that we've had going into
Sound
this.
up.
It's really been pleasing to see. I think that the sort of the analogies are not dissimilar, but I think what maybe differentiates our proposition is that, you know, we have a few existing assets that really lend themselves to this kind of movement and this kind of strategy. One of which is our Discovery Miles, which is our own rewards currency. So our clients are able to effectively gift miles to their friends and their family and earn the same amount in return when they join the bank.
So what is the incentive?
So the incentive is pretty simple. You can effectively gift up to 5,000 Discovery Miles, which is equivalent in cash to at least 500 Rand, but depending where you use it, often up to amounts which are much greater. And that's what the new joiner receives. And the referrer, the existing client, receives the same amount. Quite a valuable reward that's being generated. And it really reflects our belief that our clients are going to bring the same kind of quality clients into the bank as they currently represent.
So let me understand that. If I decide to ask a friend or suggest to a friend that they join me in a Discovery Bank account and I gift them 10,000 Discovery Miles, for argument's sake, 1,000 Rand, would I automatically also get 10,000 Discovery Miles when they do join?
The limit is up to 5,000. It's not unlimited, and you can only effectively get paid once per client. So there are some limits in place, but effectively, as soon as somebody becomes a client, they can then onward refer as well. That's quite a powerful mechanism that's been created.
There's a 12J investment opportunity to buy into the Pearl Valley Hotel by Mantis. We have a webinar tomorrow. It's Wednesday, the 26th of May at noon. If you'd like to attend the webinar, it's open to all. Go onto biznews.com, and on the home page, you will see where you can register for free. This is one of the most popular 12J investment opportunities. And if this is all new to you, it is a tax incentive which is ending at the end of June. National Treasury says it was too good for those who were investing in it. But the end of as it runs until the end of June, you can still invest in these 12J companies, and whatever you put into them, because of the tax incentive, you write off against your taxable income. So effectively what happens is the tax man pays, if you're in the top bracket, 45% of what your investment is. Well, that's tomorrow at noon, looking at the Pearl Valley Hotel. Right now, though, we are looking at Paul O'Sullivan, who's joined us in our virtual studio. Paul, it's been a busy day on the whole crime and punishment area. Not a heck of a lot of punishment going on, but certainly Dudu Myeni, who you have crossed swords with, who you have exposed, was supposed to be in the Zondo Commission today, and she never pitched. I guess this would not have surprised the founder of Forensics for Justice.
Well, you know, I think it's common knowledge that I started on Dudu Myeni. I think I sent her an email in November 2014 where I warned her that she was going onto my radar screen, and we opened the first docket against her in March 2015, the second in January 2016, and the third in March 2016. So it's 3 criminal dockets, and all of them are still awaiting prosecution. So there are issues on that front. But if you look at Dudu Myeni's background, I mean, her son is now in his early 20s. He's an extremely wealthy boy. And none of my children had that sort of money at that age. And I think it's due to the fact that, you know, he's got a very well-connected mother and father. So I think, you know, this handing out of cash to people who have done nothing to earn it, it's starting to come to an end now. And of course, the other news today has been the payments, the alleged payments to Zizi Kodwa. Now, I need to mention that EOH were on our radar screen as far back as 2017. In fact, I met with the head of forensics at EOH at the Certified Fraud Examiners Conference in Johannesburg in September 2017, and I handed him a bundle of documents and said, you better have a look at what's going on inside EOH because there's massive corruption going on. And a few weeks later, a SENS announcement came out a week after the fact. They're supposed to do it pretty much on the same day, a week after the fact that Messrs. Mackay and King dumped 200 million rands worth of EOH shares, and they alleged that they were forced to sell them because they'd pledged the shares for loans that they'd made. But I think that whole thing really should have been properly scrutinized.
That's interesting, Paul. So essentially what happened was you approached them, you gave them the documentation to say, you guys are in trouble, you better sort this out. This is before Stephen van Coller, presumably, before he went to EOH.
Yes. In fact, we met with the then CEO of EOH at the Grace Hotel in Rosebank. On the top floor, they've got a little swimming pool deck there. We met there and had a cup of tea. And I was quite robust with him. And I said to him, look, you're in charge of a company which is involved in massive corruption. And I pointed out a couple of examples. And the one example I pointed out was the relationship they had with a company that they'd purchased called FDA, which was slinging money at then Chief of Police Khomotso Paklani in return for soft contracts worth hundreds of millions of rand in the police. And of course, it subsequently came out that they were involved in other wicked deals with the police. And in fact, they were involved in what we call evergreen contracts with the police as well. And those contracts today are still being fought over because they unpurchased the acquisition of FDA, which was Keith Keating's company. And Keith Keating had to pay them back 389 million rand, which was the 50% purchase price they paid up front. And I pointed out to them that if Keith Keating paid them back any money, he was paying them with the proceeds of crime. And I sent a very stinging email to Sinead Mayat. I think it's Mayat. Correct me if I'm wrong. But I sent a very strong email to him. They then appointed, in fact, it was him that appointed ENS, not Stephen Coller. He appointed ENS and said, you know, he promised to get to the bottom of it. And I think a month or two after that, he was gone and Stephen Coller came in.
It's an interesting case. But I guess what we, members of the public and investors, and remembering that EOH was a darling on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange for a long time, would love to know is, where does this all end? Here you've got a clear case of insider trading, 200 million rand, that I think John King was the former financial director of EOH. We know where the share price is today, and yet there's no prosecution in that case. We then hear, as you said earlier, Dudu Myeni, she doesn't pitch up to the Zondo Commission. Today, McKinsey has finally settled with Transnet, paying them 870 million rand because of the shenanigans that went on there. That adds to another billion rand that McKinsey paid Eskom. And the guy who came out here at the time, Kevin Sneeder, who was their senior partner, it was his first international trip to admit to their Eskom nonsense, said, no, that was it. That was all they were exposed to. Now they've paid another 870. But I guess the question to you, Paul, is where does it all end? Are we going to see an Operation Car Wash type situation in South Africa where it goes on for years and we see dozens and dozens of people landing up in jail? Or are our courts so overburdened that that'll never happen?
Well, I think we had this discussion before, Alec, and I said that what they have to do is they have to go for the low-hanging fruit. Now, if somebody's involved in a corrupt relationship for a number of years, in theory, you can have a charge sheet that looks like a telephone book. And I'm not talking about the yellow pages. I'm talking about the big fat telephone book. Now, it's not a great idea to prosecute somebody on several thousand charges. So what they should do is pick 5 to 10 crisp, clean charges where payments have been made. I mean, I think Mr. Mackay's got some explaining to do, because after making those alleged payments to Zizi Kodwa, things started bubbling out of the woodwork. We submitted everything that we did at that stage to various journalists. Some of it was covered, some of it wasn't. But the bottom line is that him and John King, who, by the way, I forget which one of them it was, but one of them was a director of FDA, the company of Keith Keating, with Keith Keating. And when I pointed all this out to them, they unbundled the acquisition of FDA. In other words, get away, we don't want any more to do with that. But the deeds were done. The crimes were committed while they owned FDA. And then, lo and behold, they dumped just under 200 million rands worth of shares on the proposition that they were forced to do so because the shares had been given as security for loans that they'd taken out.
Stephen Nathan, that's an interesting point, because there was a buyer of those shares. Somebody did not have the information that King and Mackay had. They've bought 200 million rands worth of shares. Clearly, there's a misrepresentation of some sort towards them. What happens if, let's just say, you were running money for clients at that stage, and you were the purchaser of that stock? Is there any? Can you sue them? Can you sue the JSE? Is there anything you can do about that?
Well, I don't think you could sue the JSE.
No, but let's Stephen. I just want Stephen, because he's from that industry. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the first issue is, as Paul said, is if you have told the company, officials of that company who are fiduciaries or responsible individuals, then they have to report that. If it's serious enough, which clearly this is, and it's credible enough, they have to report that within their own governance structures and to the board. And then if the board deems it serious enough, which clearly it is, or it appears to be, then they would have to issue an announcement to alert to shareholders that there is some investigation underway, and under no circumstances should executives of that company be allowed to trade within that. So it appears that process wasn't followed, is that they traded and the actual ramifications seem to have been not followed within, or the due process not followed within the company. Now, as an investor, EOH is a listed company on the JSE, and you could, the JSE Surveillance Department and the FSCA, who regulates market conduct, it's up to them to investigate this. And if they've missed it, then certainly as an aggrieved party, you would have the right to alert them to this. Those were the channels that you would have to follow. But one would hope that the regulators in this company, in this country, as I say, being the JSE and the FSCA, would take this very seriously and follow this up. And I think that's the frustration on the part of investors and the public, is that there's so many instances of these alleged transgressions and people profiteering one way or the other without any recourse whatsoever.
Paul?
Yeah, well, I think we can actually, I sent an email to EOH on the 8th of January 2018, setting out the true course of events when it became apparent. I can't remember who it was, but somebody said we'd been threatening EOH. Well, I suppose we had been threatening them. I'd been asking them to come clean. And we talked about this so-called involuntary dealing. And I set out in a fair amount of detail, with dates involved as well, the course of events. And I noted, and I'll just run through it with you very quickly, and you can work out for yourself whether or not the sellers of those shares were being above board. On the 19th of September, we met with the then head of forensics.
Paul, sorry, we've just about got to the end. We're going to run this on BizNews, so it's easy enough to go through it. But quite clearly, your case is very well made, as it always is. And thanks again for being with us this evening and for sharing that information. Also, thanks to guest co-host Stephen Nathan, and for everybody else who participated in this program, including our team, of course, here at BizNews coming to you from the BizNews studio in Johannesburg. It is my duty then just to say thank you for being with us tonight, and to remember that you can get a recording of this program on BizNews Radio, on Spotify or iTunes, or you can listen on biznewsradio.com at 7 in the morning or 7 in the evening to the full recording. Until the next time, from our team here, cheerio. You've been listening to the Power Hour, brought to you by the team at BizNews. There we go. Okay. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much, Stephen. That was a fabulous insights tonight. Very interesting. Very good
Can
stuff.
I just, while I've got Paul on, maybe Alec, is this, I think what would be interesting, certainly for me, and I'm sure for many other people, is just to understand, what powers does Zonda have, and where does this thing go? Because at the moment, they spent almost R1 billion. You don't have to answer it now, but it's kind of like, spent almost R1 billion. There seems to be a mountain of evidence, and where does this thing go?
Well,
I don't know. Yeah.
The Sondo Commission have only one power, and that's the power that was granted to them by presidential proclamation, which established the Sondo Commission, and that is to investigate the alleged capture of state and corruption that went with it, and to make a report, and that's it, short and sweet. But as you would know, there were changes to the rules of the Sondo Commission in the middle of last year, which enables that any evidence that comes out of the Sondo Commission, the Sondo Commission can collaborate with the National Prosecuting Authority. And in fact, they are doing that. And I think we will see arrests. And I think Mr. Mackay, I think he's going to get charged. And I mean, Alec mentioned about what recourse the buyers of those shares would have. Well, if you look at my email, Alec, and I'm going to send you a sanitized version of it through now, because in there I give some heavy criticism to ENS. But if you look at